Imagine this. It's the early 1900s, cinema is young, silent films dominate. And fairy tales are still these dark cautionary tales told to warn children about the world's dangers. Now fast forward to today, say Cinderella, Snow White, or even The Lion King, and odds are the Disney versions pop into your head before the originals. Now that's not just nostalgia at work, that's culture rewriting. Disney didn't just adapt classic stories, it reshaped the language of cinema itself. And today we're going to talk about how Disney took classic tropes, bent them, and rewrote the DNA of modern storytelling. At its heart, Disney succeeded because it understood myth. Before Disney, fairy tales were brutal. Cinderella's stepsisters cut off their toes to fit into the glass slipper, the little mermaid doesn't get the prince, she dissolves into sea foam. And Frozen, Elsa was an evil snow queen and she wasn't by any means related to Anna. These stories weren't about happily ever after. They were morality plays, warnings about greed, vanity, lust, and the inevitable suffering. Disney looked at these tales and said, what if children didn't cry themselves to sleep? And from there, cinema's most powerful transformation began. So what exactly did Disney do? Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, often called the first full-length animated feature, did more than pioneer animation. It distilled elements from German fairy tales and European romanticism into something distinctly modern. The evil stepmother, the innocent heroine, and the loyal companions were recognizable tropes. But Disney polished them into clear moral contrasts that a broad audience could instantly grasp. Additionally, the creation of Snow White and the exaggerated optimism that became the foundation of the theme of future Disney movies become much more historically relevant when you think of the Great Depression era of the 1930s. What about Cinderella? While the original tale ends with Cinderella brutally punishing her stepmother and stepsisters, the movie strictly limits Cinderella to being a morally strong character. In other words, villains were simplified to make the heroes shine. Instead of complex morality, we got iconic evil: Scar, Ursula, and Maleficent. Their flamboyant personalities made them unforgettable, but also easier for young audiences to process. Where classic cinema often blurred good and evil, Disney cemented them into two opposing poles, creating a template that would echo through decades of film storytelling. In simplifying good and evil, Disney didn't just adapt these fairy tales, it reinvented them. Stories once rooted in tragedy were reshaped into fantasies of hope and resolution. Where the originals ended in death, despair, or brutal punishment, Disney substituted joy, song, and a promise of happily ever after. The wicked stepsisters who once mutilated their own fate were softened into comic relief. Ariel, who in Andersen's tale dissolved into sea foam, instead got a wedding. In Disney's hands, cautionary fables became comforting dreams. But here's the kicker. Disney's influence didn't just stay in the princess box, it bled into all of cinema. Think about it.
Let me think.
The idea of a clear hero's journey, comic relief sidekicks, and big emotional payoffs isn't just Disney, it's in hero movies, sci-fi epics, or even rom-coms. In traditional myths and even early westerns, the hero grows through trials, often scarred and hardened by experience. Disney softened that trajectory. Instead of greedy test of survivor, heroes like Simba or Mulan proved themselves through moral clarity, courage, and faith in who they already were. The journey became less about transformation and more about realizing one's true identity, a trope that now defines not just Disney, but much of modern blockbuster storytelling. What about romance? In early Hollywood, romance was often witty, even cynical. Think of Clark and Claudette in It Happened One Night. Disney, however, simplified love into destiny. The princess and prince didn't fall in love through banter or conflict, but through recognition. A single look, a shared song, a magical inevitability. This trope made love less about chemistry and more about fate, influencing not just animation but the way audiences expected romance to be portrayed on screen. Disney's portrayal of either romance would later be parodied or subverted through modern films like Shrek or La La Land. Pixar, Marvel, and even live-action blockbusters now follow a rhythm that feels Disneyfied. And while that rhythm is comforting, it's also limiting. When we walk into the theater for a Disney movie or even a Marvel movie, we are all expecting a happy ending, which can take the fun out of the movie. Which is one of the reasons why Infinity War was such a big cultural phenomenon when it came out. This rewriting of tropes is double-edged. While it gave the audience stories of hope and universality, it also flattened complexity. Villains became purely evil, romance became formulaic, and happy endings became non-negotiable. Take Claude Frollo, for example. As much as I love The Hunchback of Notre Dame, the film removed all the complexity the character had in the original book written by Victor Hugo. Disney's stories can feel overly simplified, almost like the Western genre before it was severely redefined by John Ford and later even more by Sergio Leone. But perhaps that simplicity is the point. Disney wasn't trying to reflect the complexities of life, it was offering myths that could be retold endlessly, a thematic language that transcends generations. Disney didn't just rewrite tropes, it rewrote how we consume stories, how we define heroes, villains, love, and even what an ending should feel like. But something seems to be changing these days. Disney is constantly trying to change their own trope with each of their new releases. Of course, we can't criticize a century-long studio trying something new and different, especially when the films of the early 2010s have done them so well. But the audience doesn't seem to respond as well as they used to in their old movies anymore. Which raises the question of whether changing the trope that made them so beloved in the first place is really the answer moving forward. Could it be that their attempt to change their own original trope is exactly what's killing their magic?